The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time out of your Friday to join us for our webinar on early learning and the Every Student Succeeds Act. We're really pleased to have you here. We have a large group registered for today, so that's really exciting. There's tremendous opportunity before us, and we're really excited that you all want to learn more about that. So this morning we will spend time talking about why early learning. Now, most of you are from early learning, so you already know the why. So we're going to frame that more in how you might talk to your K through 12 peers to help them understand why early learning. We will also talk about and spend the bulk of our time on what are the requirements and what are the opportunities in ESSA, and then talk about what supports are going to be available to local education agencies and to early learning leaders for collaboration in developing plans. So today, our presenters include me. I'm Tracy Zimmerman, the Executive Director of the North Carolina Early Childhood Foundation. Danielle Hewen, who is a Senior Policy Analyst with Education Council. We have Carla Garrett, who is the Title I preschool consultant at the Office of Early Learning at DPI, and Karen McKnight, who is who's the director of the North Carolina Head Start Collaborative Office, also at DPI. We are very grateful to Head Start for funding this collaborative work as we move forward. So we're really excited about the partnership that we have at the state level and what you all will be doing hopefully at the local level. Because we have such a large group, we will take questions through the question box. So you can see here, if you have a question during the webinar, please type it in that box and we will take time at the end to go through them. So type them in however you want along the way, and then we will address as many as possible at the end of the session. So I started with why is this something the K through 12 community should care about? Why early learning? And you know that this is something that every district in our state, and indeed in many states across the country, are really struggling with third grade reading. And so that is really one of our key entree points into talking about why we need to focus on birth to 8 and beginning at birth if we're going to get the outcomes we want for young children. And here are a few statistics that you might raise. Some of you are probably quite familiar with these about the connections of what happens in the early years and how that continues to trend as children get older. And so currently, 38% of North Carolina's fourth graders in 2015 scored at or above proficient in reading as measured by the National Association for Educational Assessment, National Assessment for Educational Progress. That I do want to note, those are NAEP scores and not North Carolina end of grade reading scores. And that's primarily because we can use these to really see trend data, which is less possible with EOG as those change, the criteria change and the test changes. And we can also compare ourselves to other states. And then you can see, while there's only 38% at the end of fourth grade, that continues up so that in high school in 2016, high school students, only 34% met ACT college readiness benchmarks in reading. And we see this play out, and it's one of the reasons why the business community is becoming so engaged. So you can certainly speak to the support business leaders have across the state, and that's because they have difficulty hiring because they're not finding the skilled workers they need. And we know, based on research out of Georgetown, that 67% of jobs in North Carolina will require some post-secondary education by 2020. And this skills gap has really promoted and prompted business leaders to get engaged not only in education, but education starting at birth. And so the National Business Roundtable recently released a report looking at education and the economy, and has a statement about a thriving economy depends on a strong foundation for children through quality education at an early age. And within North Carolina, folks led by SAS are really speaking to what we need to be doing, again, thinking from birth and birth to 8 continuum around this. So there's tremendous support for early investments and thinking about children early on. And that's because we know that we can only increase our reading proficiency. We know this from the research. We know this from experience if we begin early on. And that has a tremendous amount to do with brain science, which I'll just touch on very briefly in a minute. And again, that's really to reinforce some of the points that you all can be using as you engage those in the K through 12 space. And lastly, in terms of just showing that there's incredible support in our state for this and that North Carolina voters understand the long-term benefits of investing in high quality early childhood education, these figures here come from a 2016 poll of North Carolina voters. It was conducted by a bipartisan polling team that polls for the Wall Street Journal. And you can see that voters want us to be doing more to prepare children for kindergarten. And they understand that when we do, we get better outcomes in school, in reading, and in creating a skilled workforce of the future. And that's because the science shows us that the years from birth to 8 are the most rapid period of development, and that end of third grade outcomes are so important that they are very predictive of academic achievement and future career success. And so I'm actually not going to give you a 5-minute crash course in brain science because I think most of you have heard me do that before. But I'm going to highlight a couple of points that I hope you will use in your outreach. So the first, again, is that we know child development is dynamic and it's an interactive process. It is not, in fact, predetermined. And that really what builds a strong foundation for learning are the early experiences children have beginning at birth and, in fact, prenatally to build strong brains. And so every experience a child has is building connections in their brain. And the more positive early experiences and interactions they have, the stronger those connections are. And unfortunately, when they're not reinforced and those interactions are not positive, then many of those connections can weaken and, in fact, prune. And so this is one of the reasons that we have to be looking at the earliest years and thinking about what are our K through 12 academic goals. We're only going to meet them if we are ensuring that children are having the experiences they need for positive brain development. And so these are some of the talking points you might use about the research. And we know that early experiences, as I said, are built into children's bodies. They literally shape brain architecture. It's much harder to, you can certainly make up for in early experiences that perhaps were not ideal, but it's much harder and it costs a lot more money. And so every experience a baby has is forming a neural connection in the brain, and not all of these will last. So really it's about these positive early experiences, and that's where folks can think about what are the opportunities within ESSA to support those positive early experiences that build a strong foundation for learning. And as part of that, we also know that it's really high quality teachers beginning at birth that are essential to this, that the interactions children are having with their teachers play an essential role in determining how brains are wired, and that it takes specialized knowledge and skills in order to be able to support children's optimal development. So a final talking point you might also use is to remind folks that we have economic research on this as well. That Professor James Heckman, you may be familiar with the Heckman equation. He is a Nobel Prize winner in economics, and he began his research in looking at how do you develop human capital. And it was through his research in that area that he came to early learning. and understood that this is really where we can make the greatest investment for our future in building a foundation for school, career, and life success. And so, what this chart shows you is that the earlier we invest, the greater return we get, the bigger impact. It doesn't mean that we don't continue these investments all the way through this graph. What it means is that if we want to make the most of these later investments, we have to start early on. And so, again, we know what children need, and ESSA provides an opportunity to think about what are the policies and practices that we can be working on collaboratively to ensure that children have health and development on track, that they have supported and supportive families and communities, and high quality birth through age 8 learning environments with regular attendance. So those are some of the points you might use as you're engaging folks around your collaborative work in early learning and ESSA planning. I'm going to turn it over now to Danielle Hewen, who is with Education Policy, who is going to talk about what are the opportunities and requirements within ESSA.
Thanks, Tracy, and thank you to everybody for joining us. I am, as Tracy said, Danielle Ewan from Education Council in Washington, D.C. Tracy talked about the brain science and some of the high-level messages that we hope you all will be taking as you're having ongoing conversations with your school district leaders and others in your community about building a birth to third grade continuum. And I'm going to narrow in on some of the specifics that are in the Every Student Succeeds Act that you can add to those conversations as you're starting to talk about what your community will look like as ESSA is implemented, and really trying to embed a birth to third grade set of strategies in the implementation of the new law, in the plan your district will be writing over the next few months, and in the ongoing guidance, technical assistance, and policy and practice change that your district will be implementing. So we'll be talking through some of the requirements in the law, some of the opportunities in the law. If you have questions throughout, please feel free to raise your hand in the chat box, and we'll either answer them while we're talking, or we will make sure we get to them at the end. So let me go to the first slide and just remind folks about what the new law created. The Every Student Succeeds Act, known as ESSA, was passed in December of 2015, which many of you may know. It represents a fundamental shift in how federal education policy is written, in that it takes responsibility from the federal level and devolves it to the states and to local communities in terms of the district plans. This gives states and districts the opportunity to create new practices, new policies that are responsive to the needs of the children and families in their own communities. It gives them incentives to innovate and to think about the right reforms for the communities and schools at each district level. And it provides the opportunity to think differently about how schools and districts approach the students and families that they serve. Because the law is relatively new, the federal government is still thinking about the right kinds of regulations and guidance. State plans are still being reviewed by the federal government, and district plans are just now being written. There will be a lot of new things coming out in implementation of the law over the next few years. And so the law will implementation will change. What happens on the ground will change over time. And again, that presents a real opportunity. The real opportunity is for the early childhood community. The law talks about early childhood programs, teachers, and students throughout each and every title. Early childhood is referred to as an important innovation, an important intervention for young kids. But there are very few requirements, although we're going to talk about some of them in the course of this morning's conversation. And so in order to make sure that children from birth through third grade are included in the kinds of activities that districts in the state undertake, we'll need folks just like you all to really sit down at the table with district leadership and with state leaders going forward to talk about what the right changes are to be put into place. So just to remind folks that in many ways, ESSA implementation will build on what we had before. And you can see on the next slide that Title I, which is go back one slide, Tracy. Title I, which is a core, I'm sorry, everybody, I skipped a slide. The Title I has many allowable uses. Go ahead, Tracy, you can move forward. that at the district level, local education agencies are allowed to use their Title I funds for either district-wide programs to support early childhood students, or at the school level for school-wide or targeted interventions. The funds can be used to provide services for children from birth through the age of school entry and beyond, and they can be used both in the school building and in community programs to support high-quality services for young children. So going to the next slide, my apologies again, just wanted to highlight for folks how the law builds on the allowable uses of Title I that we have always had. Title I, as many of you know, is a flexible source of funding. It can be used for many different services and supports for children. It doesn't just have to be used for direct instruction. So when it comes to services for children birthed through the age of school entry, the funds can be used for classroom-based instruction. They can be used for teacher salaries. They can be used to extend the day in community-based programs like Head Start or other child care programs. The funds can be used for professional development, and we're going to talk a lot about that as I get into the presentation. Importantly, as we think about the connections with the health community, Title I funds can be used for support services such as nutrition, for screenings for vision, hearing, and dental services, and for developmental screeners or counseling services. The funds can also be used for transition and for summer enrichment programs, which is an important thing to think about as we're trying to create better pathways for children and families to move through early childhood programs and into school. And so as we move into the next slide, I'm going to talk about what the requirements are for early learning in the law and what those requirements create in terms of opportunities for coordination, improved transition, and higher quality. And on this first slide, you can see I've highlighted a document that came out of the U.S. Department of Education in 2016. It is what's called non-regulatory guidance in that it does not have the rule of law, but it is an important and valuable document because the Department of Education went through the entire law, highlighted requirements for how districts and states should support early learning, but also, very importantly, talked about allowable and possible uses of the funds. And I find this document to be really useful to start the conversation between the early childhood community and school district leaders, because it puts everybody in the same frame of this is what we must do and this is what we can do. And it highlights how many opportunities there are for every kind of coordination, for every kind of partnership, whether it's one that comes with a lot of funding, where we're leveraging different funding sources at the community level, or one where we're making policy change, or just working together to leverage what's already in the community. And as we go through the presentation, I'm going to talk about those all of those different options a lot. But again, just to call your attention to this document, in the back, you can see I've highlighted a piece of it. There is a chart that goes through what's required at the state and local level and what is allowable. And I think starting with that appendix to the guidance is an important place to start the conversation. So on the next slide, you can see I'm starting to talk about some of the real requirements. States must describe in their state plan how they will support local education agencies and schools that use any funds, whether it's Title I, Title II, Title III, or others, to support early learning programs. In other words, your district is not in this alone, and if you need support from the state, this is the place to talk to your state agency about what they can do. The state will also provide information to local agencies about family and community engagement strategies. This is a really important and valuable part where we can start coordination conversations. The early childhood community does a lot of family and community engagement. We know that that's a place where some of our school districts struggle, and more importantly, it's one of the places where we first start to lose families in that transition. And so helping your district to think about the resources that are available from the state to support family and community engagement, and as the early childhood community, helping the districts think about what those appropriate strategies and practices are and how the community can support those practices can be a great first step to improving the quality of what happens as families move between the two systems. The next slide continues the coordination conversation. We know that one of the most important ways that we can support children and family is by supporting high quality transitions between and across different settings. While the law does not define transition, we know from Head Start guidance and other high quality programs what good transitions look like. We know it means sharing expectations between and across settings. We know that it includes sharing data, doing joint professional development, having regular and routine conversations that are designed to identify gaps and needs at the community level and to come up with ways to address those gaps through resources, through partnerships, and other coordination. And the law really talks about that as LEAs sit down and think about how they're going to use Title I funds for early childhood, that transition services be a core part of that planning. You can see on the next slide, there are some more specific coordination requirements as related to Head Start and other early childhood programs. In the past, Head Start programs have been required to come up with a memorandum of understanding or a memorandum of agreement with their local school district about how to coordinate and help transition children. For many Head Start programs, it was very difficult to get those agreements in place because it was essentially a one-way street. They were being obligated by the law governing their funds to go talk to districts, but there was no obligation on the part of districts to reciprocate or to agree to those memoranda. Now the law has created a two-way street where the force of law is on both sides. Your local school district, your local education agency is now required to create those coordination agreements. And you can see in the box on the slide that whether the funds are being used for early childhood or not, that every local education agency must have a coordination agreement with Head Start and, if possible, with other early childhood organizations in the community. There are lots of folks thinking about what this can look like. There are a number of model MOAs online, and we can help you find those. The National Head Start Association, in partnership with the Council of Chief State School Officers, is about to release, hopefully any day now, a resource that will help create these agreements and really foster coordination at the local level. I think it's also important to remember that these coordination requirements should be a starting point for how to do ongoing high-quality coordination between and across different settings to improve the quality of what children have throughout their experiences from birth through, and that it's an opportunity to really leverage everything that is being used in the community to serve young kids and to expand the availability of high-quality settings for children across infants, toddlers, preschoolers, and into school. And there's roles for teachers in that coordination. There's roles for principals and other school leaders, as well for leaders at the district level. But these agreements are a really important place to start. And as we're thinking about how to frame the district plans that will be written in the next few months, thinking about where coordination can be improved, thinking about the opportunities for partnership is one of the best first steps to helping to write that district plan with an eye to early childhood services and supports for young children. So moving a little bit away from coordination, another requirement that is in law is on data reporting. Your local education agency is now required to report on the number and percent of children enrolled in preschool programs. Largely, that is about the number of kids that are in public school pre-K programs. However, this is a place for advocacy and for really starting to talk about the needs of a community. If we know that a small percentage of our 4-year-olds and a small percentage of our 3-year-olds are being served in public school programs, but a larger percentage are served in the community, that's something to talk about to avoid duplication of services and to really understand where resources need to be targeted to ensure that all kids have access to high quality. If we know that children are being served widely, but that 4-year-old children are being served widely, but 3s aren't, that's another opportunity. If you know at your community level that children from language minority households are not served in the same percentages as other children, that's another way to start this conversation and to use the data requirement in the law to really push the conversation to be about what children and families need but are not getting currently. Another requirement that is in the law talks about when districts are using funds for early childhood, they must support, coordinate, and integrate services provided with existing early childhood. Again, this is about coordination, but it's also about how the district plan is written to be aware of what is available in the community. Again, thinking in a broad way about how partnerships can really support children and families. The law also clarifies that when funds are used for early childhood services by the LEA or a school, they have to follow the Head Start standards. There have been a lot of questions around this. The non-regulatory guidance I referenced earlier talks about it extensively. What the federal government has basically said is that that means the education standards in the Head Start performance framework must be followed, which means that programs should have a research-based curriculum, have ongoing assessment of children as Head Start programs do 3 times a year, do extensive family community engagement that is appropriate for families. It also means they should be coordinating with Head Start and other early childhood programs to understand those standards and how they can be implemented appropriately for children and families. The next area where the law really discusses opportunities to coordinate with the early childhood community at the local level is in use of professional development dollars. Title II of the law talks about professional development extensively. As the district is writing its district application, they will need to talk about how they plan to use those dollars that are targeted for professional development. The law made several really important changes that focus the attention of districts, or can be used to focus the attention of districts, on early childhood professionals. First, the law clearly states that funds in Title II can be used for joint professional development with community providers. In other words, as we're thinking about how to have common expectations for young kids between and across settings, and how we're talking about how to improve the quality of settings, whether children are in infant programs, preschool programs, or moving into kindergarten, 1st and 2nd, 3rd grade, bringing together teachers and professionals that serve all of those kids and having common professional development that talks about developmentally appropriate practice, development across the range of developmental areas, and thinking about how to make sure that we have the best possible practices at the classroom level and sharing those best practices with each other there's a huge opportunity. The other big change in the law was really talking about that professional development dollars can and should be used to help school professionals understand the development of children through age 8. In other words, the language in the law is set up to encourage professional development across that birth to 3rd grade continuum. For districts that are really starting to engage in this conversation, or that want to do better in the conversation they're already having, the professional development dollars can also be used to do coaching and mentoring, and to bring in professionals from the community who are doing early childhood and those in school-based settings to coach each other in peer mentoring. There's a new report out just this week from New America, which talks about the value of coaching in early childhood settings. And as you're starting to talk to your districts about ways they can improve the quality of programs, using that report and others like it to make the case is a big piece of what we can talk about. The next slide just talks about opportunities to continue to align professional development so that districts are thinking about the various ways that they can have professional development that goes across birth to 3rd grade. And Tracy, if you can go to the next slide, I'm going to talk about, and now to go to the next slide, and we'll talk about school improvement. A core component of the new law is accountability. While many states have indicators and measures that are for 3rd grade and up, many of the states don't have measures for younger kids. Some states do. But importantly, one of the places where we have heard about integration of early childhood into the accountability system is in school improvement. As states collect data on what's going on at the school level, they have to identify schools in the bottom 5% and schools that are not serving particular subgroups well. Once those schools are identified, they're put into various categories of school improvement, and they have to come up with a plan for how they're going to do better. Part of that plan is creating a needs assessment for the community. We are encouraging districts at the local level, and North Carolina has put this into their state plan, to really think about where early childhood can fit in to the school improvement conversation, where we hope that as districts are doing needs assessment for their schools, that they will include information about the early childhood landscape. And by that, I mean they will start to collect information on where children have been, at least in their preschool years, if not earlier, what the quality of those settings are, the types of curriculum available to young children, whether children from particular subgroups, children from language minority households, children who are very poor, children who are homeless, where those children are served and how they're served. The kind of supports available to children and families in the community, and then thinking about how to use that information both to improve the quality of teaching as children enter school, but also to reach back into the community and to address gaps so that children have what they need before they enter the school building. The needs assessment can also be used to identify strengths in the community. Who is providing high quality before and after school care? What are children doing during the summer? And how can those resources be used to support the school improvement strategy that is being put in place? On this next slide, I wanted to make it real for folks. As you're thinking about sitting down with your district leaders to create your plan in the next few months, it's helpful to have ideas of what other districts have done. So on this slide, we have 4 communities from around the country of various sizes that have used in the past, before ESSA was implemented, their Title I funds and other funds out of federal education laws to really support high quality early childhood across the birth to 3rd grade spectrum. So you can see in Gwinnett County in Georgia, they hired district transition specialists, both at the district level and at each school building, to foster that relationship with the community and to make sure that children and families had what they needed as they moved between settings, but also that there were conversations between the district, between individual schools and the community-based providers that were serving families, so that everybody knew what the appropriate expectations were, what children were exposed to in their early childhood experiences, that there were connections between and across various parts of the community. In Melrose, Massachusetts, a smaller district, they looked across their district at the needs of their children and decided that what they really needed to make sure that kids were well served when they went into kindergarten was to have every 4-year-old have a high quality developmental screening, so that they knew when children needed referrals, they knew what supports they needed to have in place when kids came to kindergarten, and they could really design a new program that met the needs of the children that were coming in because they were aware of what those needs and strengths were. In Iowa, in Davenport, they looked across their community and realized that while they didn't need a lot of investments in 4-year-old programs, they really needed to support the birth to 5 continuum and make sure that infants and toddlers had high quality experiences. And so they used some of their Title I funds to support that as part of a community table that was brought together on a regular basis to identify gaps and to think about the resources in the community. And so finally, many of you may be aware of the Chicago Child Parent Centers, which provide comprehensive education and family support services for young children through 3rd grade. Those have been highly evaluated. They have been found to make real differences in outcomes for children and families in Chicago and are being exported to other communities in the Midwest. I think importantly, the Chicago Child Parent Centers, because they have a lot of evaluation and evidence, can be a place to start conversations with your school district about evidence-based interventions as they're thinking about their district plan. So just going to the next slide, I wanted folks to be able to think about this in a comprehensive way. So as your district is sitting down to write their plan, they are going to be asked by the state to think about various outcomes for young kids. They're going to be asked to think about accountability, what they're going to do for school improvement, how they're improving assessment and standards for all kids, and finally, how all students will be college and career ready as they move through the district's elementary, middle, and high schools. And so as you are sitting with those folks and trying to think about how early childhood from a birth to 3rd grade perspective can be a part of the district plan for implementing ESSA, I have some questions here on the slides that can really frame that birth to 3rd grade conversation within those priority areas for the state and your local district. So thinking about accountability, what do we know about young kids? What kind of data are we collecting? What do we know about children who are, for instance, suspended or expelled at younger ages? What do we know about children's attendance, and how are we addressing that? We talked about school improvement and whether we're thinking about appropriate interventions that go from at least pre-K into 3rd grade, and our evidence base that includes some of the best practices that we know in early childhood. For standards and assessments, really helping the district think about, are they doing, do they have standards in place to address the whole child? Are they thinking about social emotional? Have they done professional development to make sure that the children's needs are met across the range of development? And finally, when thinking about whether all students are college and career ready, really thinking about how young children's experiences, whether they're reflected in coordination agreements, whether they're reflected in the kindergarten entry assessment or other data collection, can change what happens in classrooms across kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade, so that children have an integrated experience that builds on their own strengths and that is reflective of what they've experienced. So these are just some ideas. We're going to talk a lot more as we go through the next few months about how those district plans can reflect a birth to 3rd grade perspective, but I hope this has given you some ideas to start the conversation, and I will stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Danielle. I'm now going to turn it over to Karen McKnight and Carla Garrett, who are going to outline some of the supports that will be available to communities. I see lots of questions coming in, so keep them coming. And when Carla and Karen are done, we will begin addressing those.
Hello, this is Karen McKnight. As Tracy mentioned, I'm the director of the Head Start State Collaboration Office. And just to tell you a little bit about my office, my role is to build early childhood collaborations. And so this is a great opportunity to do that. And so just to go a little bit into more detail about this project and how we're going to work with you all in supporting your local ESSA plans. We're doing this in 3 phases. First, we're building awareness through conferences, webinars, including this webinar. So we've presented at the Title I Conference, the School Board Association Conference, and to Head Start directors on this work, sharing this project and the slides that you've just seen. We've also done webinars for the Superintendent's Association and the School Board Association, including this and this one for you all, to continue building that awareness. The next step is the regional meetings that we will begin the week of January 22nd, which many of you have registered for, and we will talk more about shortly. And then the third piece of this is that we will be providing intensive support to a small number of local teams. And we'll talk more about that process as well.
And good morning, this is Carla Garrett. I'm glad to be with you and happy that you've chosen to spend your time with us. We are really excited about this work. And I work again in the Office of Early Learning with Title I Preschool Statewide Consultant. So the next slide that you have here is a visual of a timeline of all the activities that are occurring in terms of this work. And pretty short timeline, we have a lot to do in a small amount of time. So as Karen mentioned, we've already started this work back in November when we presented at a couple of conferences, and we've already been working on the webinars, including the one for you today. There is another circle that I think we could probably add after the February through May blue circle, which would be a June circle. And that one is really important to Title I directors and to LEAs, because that is when the ESSA plan is due from the local district to the state office, so to federal program monitoring. So that's one that we'll be thinking about, and that's why we've structured the timeline as we have, so that we can really get that awareness piece out that Karen mentioned. And then the exciting part is we will be hosting regional meetings in January, as she mentioned, the week of the 22nd. And in addition to that, there is an application process that will be released in January on the 8th. And is due on February 2nd. So there's an opportunity for you and your team to apply for a small amount of funds to support this particular work. So this is not additional funding in terms of what the LEA receives for services. This is funding to support your collaborative work on this, thinking about your relationships with stakeholders, with the team, and how you can work together to best serve children and families. So when we think about this piece in terms of the school districts in Title I, so that the LEA is responsible for the plan. It's the same plan that they've had to do in the past, and it's based on that allocation of money that they receive within their district. So again, it's not an additional pot of funds, but it's the money that they receive. And the school district is also responsible for the rules and regs. So none of that has changed. But what is required is this really important piece of collaborating and having those relationships with partners and stakeholders. We are also really excited to say that, thinking about our registration, 47 teams are already registered. So great work with that. As far as thinking about your team members, we have some requirements. So thinking about coming to the regional meetings and your registration, again, many of you have already registered. The requirements of the teams that have to be there are the Head Start director, the Title I director or rep, the Smart Start local partnership, and the superintendent or a representative.
And so one of the reasons we wanted Head Start to be part of this is, as Danielle mentioned, Head Start Act has always required collaboration between Head Start and the local education agencies or your local school districts for disability services and transitions. And again, as Danielle said, a lot of that has always just been on the Head Start side. Now, ESSA makes that more reciprocal. And also, Head Start is mentioned in non-regulatory guidance over 50 times. So Head Start does have a big role in your local ESSA plans.
And the reason Title I is included, as I mentioned before, is that, that particular area is responsible for a bulk of this work. And then thinking about Title I in North Carolina, and last year, $52 million was spent on Title I preschool, serving children 0 to 5, typically in classrooms and typically 3 and 4-year-old children. But just to let you know that, and also that 70 of our 115 LEAs do choose to allocate funding for early learning. So that's really great that we focus on that early learning piece in North Carolina and thinking about that work and how Title I is integrally involved in this.
We also wanted the Smart Start partnerships to be represented, as they are a large part of your local early childhood community. Many run NC Pre-K and also have a lot of other early childhood initiatives and are an important community partner for this work.
And finally, the superintendent or a representative is crucial to this work because that's the leader of the LEA, again, responsible for getting that ESSA plan done and submitting and thinking about those funds and making recommendations to the school board. So again, thinking about the school district and the responsibility for getting this work done and including the stakeholders.
So we also wanted to mention that if you are having difficulty finding or building your team with your Head Start director or your local Smart Start partnership, to reach out to one of us and we can support you in that. We have seen some of the registrations are not including those partners. And again, please reach out and let us know if you need support in creating those teams.
All right, so in addition to the 4 required people who are to attend the regional meetings, there are also spaces for 2 additional members. When you think about your team at the local level, please know that your team can be as large as you would like for it to be. And there's a list of people here to give you some ideas about who could be included. We are limited with space at our regional meetings, which is why we are having this limited to 2 additional folks. But really think about who is included on your team. Think about how to really gain diverse perspectives. Think about the partners that you already have in your particular areas. Many of you work with each other on many other levels, whether it be partnership board or CCR&R board, advisory committee. And many of you in smaller areas wear multiple hats. So it's the same people over and over. In the larger districts, it's many more bodies that are included. So just kind of think about all of that as you design your teams, and hopefully at the local level, you can include many of these folks like principals and teachers and child care resource and referral, thinking about homeless education and NC Pre-K, your health system, your higher ed, it could be community colleges or 4-year universities. We've had a lot of interest from school board members, so I do want to highlight that. We presented at the School Board Association, had a good turnout for that, and also a request to create a webinar that was specifically targeted to school board members. So we've done that and posted it on our website. There is a lot of interest in this work and really thinking about that birth through 3rd grade continuum. So really work hard, think about who your team members are and include those really important folks. And again, know that your teams at the local level can be much larger than the 6 that will attend the regional meetings.
Okay, so we were also, we've been talking about these regional meetings. There are 4 regional meetings, as you can see. Greenville, Monday, January 22nd. In Fayetteville on Tuesday, January 23rd. In Asheville on Thursday, January 25th. And on Friday in Winston-Salem on January 26th. The meetings will be from 10 to 3 and lunch will be provided. During these meetings, you'll have the opportunity to learn more about the early learning opportunities in ESSA, and then we will have some time for you to engage with your team on your local district planning to begin that work.
So now for some conversation about the intensive support. So we mentioned this application process, and we have indicated that it will be short. So that's the good news. Again, released January 8th and due on February 2nd. So quick sort of turnaround time here, but be thinking about that. And one thing we'll definitely be looking for is collaborative partnerships. So making sure that you have the required members on the team and those others at the local level that are options. And then when you complete the application and submit, we'll have a review selection piece that includes looking at those areas. And then also the ones who are selected to receive the funding will get intensive coaching materials to support your work, thinking about how to work together in this shared community. We'll help you review your work on your local plan. So you'll actually be writing that and using data from your particular areas, and then receiving a small stipend. So again, the stipend is to support this collaborative process and those logistics. But we are really excited about this because this will get, the timeline enables us to give you feedback and support your work so that when you do go to submit the local plans within CCIP, which is our electronic system at DPI where you submit the ESSA plan, that you'll get the feedback and you'll be able to tweak it before it goes to your federal program monitoring consultants for LEAs in June.
Okay, so your next steps, you're going to share this webinar with your colleagues. You can begin collaborating and building your team, and don't forget those local community partners. And again, if you have difficulty, please reach out and we'll be happy to support you in that. Register for a regional meeting, and then use ESSA as a vehicle to advance a comprehensive birth through third grade continuum.
And so just to mention too, so the birth through third grade continuum is so important, and thinking about that work and the whole child and how we can work together in the communities. And Tracy mentioned earlier when she was talking about brain development, that brains are built, not born. And hopefully that's a really important key piece that you can remember. And the second one would be that relationships are key. And this particular work, especially of how that works in your local communities. And again, looking at the teams and making sure you have the required folks represented, because you want to be able to be there, get the most out of this opportunity, and also have your application selected if you choose to apply. So thank you again so much for your attention to this work. We think it's really important and we are very excited.
Thank you, Carla and Karen, for that. We have a lot of questions, so I'm going to go through as many as we can, and then if we don't get to any, we'll be sure to respond offline as well. So the first is, will more funds be available for Title I, or does this mean that this is more requirements with already limited funding? Should I turn that over to you, Danielle?
Sure. So Title I is operated on a funding formula, and the funding formula is run every year, and sometimes districts get more and sometimes they get less. And the federal government sometimes puts more money in and sometimes they don't. Congress has not yet passed the appropriations for 2018. We don't expect them to put a significant amount of new money into Title I. Having said that, many of these requirements are low cost, high touch, in that there are already staff in the districts who are doing some of this work, and it's just asking them to think about their work in a different way. There are no requirements that money be spent on young kids. That's the opportunity here. As schools and school districts move into school improvement, there are additional funds that will come their way, potentially based on the plans they put in place and how your state is allocating those funds. But this is not a take from one child to pay for another. This is an opportunity for districts to think differently about how they're spending their current dollars. The law requires that interventions be evidence-based. We know that early childhood is highly evidence-based across the definitions in the law. And so really helping your district to think about what their students and families need from the beginning of their educational experience in order to be college and career ready is the part of the conversation that needs to be had. And districts might well think about spending the dollars they have in new ways that might be more effective, that might serve different children. So these are not burdensome requirements that will cause that cost lots of funding. In many cases, funding choices, in many cases, they're building on what you're already doing.
Thanks, Danielle. This one's for Carla. Will DPI include this now required MOA, this was referring to the Head Start, in the related documents section of the CCIP?
So I would imagine that there will be movement in that direction as we look at all the new requirements included with ESSA, and we're happy to provide support with that, as well as some examples of MOUs, as Danielle mentioned earlier. Absolutely.
And a follow-up to that, I'm not sure if this, whoever feels best equipped to answer, please jump in. If your LEA is the Head Start grantee, is this coordination agreement required?
This is Karen. Yes.
Go ahead, Karen.
I believe it is. Dana, you may have better information there.
Yeah, I think that it is, because while the LEA might be the grantee, that doesn't mean that district leadership has thought about coordination between the Head Start program into kindergarten. And so I do believe that they're still required and that they can be really useful. You might already have those policies in place, but making sure that your district leadership and your school leadership are aware of them and are using the tools that those agreements will help with can be a huge boon to the community.
The next question is regarding data, and it's where is the data on the number and percent of pre-K children enrolled in a community housed? And
yep. So I will take this one to start. So your school district already submits the number of kids that are served in their public school programs to the Office of Civil Rights. And you can find that data on the Federal Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights page, and we'll send out that link as part of the follow-up, Tracy, if you remind me. That is just about the number of kids served. So in effect, for the percentage, it's the numerator. As a community bit of advocacy, thinking about what the denominator should be. Is it just 4-year-olds? Is it all 3s and 4s? Is it just kids who are going to school? Is it kids in community programs as well? That's kind of up to you to format unless we see some guidance on it. But right now, the percentage, how you calculate the percentage is really a local community decision.
And if you're looking for data just to inform your decision making of the percentage of kids that might be being served in NC pre-K, which would just be 4-year-olds, that data is available. We have some of it on our website, and we can share that as well. This one is for you, Danielle. What screening tool does Melrose, Massachusetts use? Do you happen to know?
Yeah, it's a while now. I believe, don't quote me, I believe they use the Brigance, but I'm not sure of that at this point. Across the country, we've seen a number of different developmental screeners used, some of them as part of the KEA process, some of them in other settings, some of them part of their early intervention and child find. So there's been a lot used.
Great. Carla, will there be a plan given to LEAs to complete, or will it be part of what we enter in CCIP? Will there be a sample early childhood needs assessment?
So it would be what you already complete in terms of your local community needs assessment piece. And then the CCIP information, much of that was changed to be a narrative this past year. And so we may tweak it a bit here and there, but I would imagine that it would be pretty similar to what you submitted back in August.
Great. So now that there's more flexibility with Title I funds, can we pay for personnel support and not have to determine the percentage of Title I children we serve in order to pay personnel?
So that question, I believe, sounds like it's about cost allocation. Is that correct? That's what I'm thinking. So, we're really trying to figure out how this will look, for example, within CCIP, because I think in the past, most of the time, what we've done with Title I preschool funds has been related to number of children served, and many of our children are blended or dually enrolled in North Carolina. So that's where the cost allocation piece comes from, of not spending more than your share on Title I. So we are thinking about how you would input that information in a different way based on what your choices are for serving, for really thinking about early learning in a different way. So just know that's in process.
Okay, another question is, what other education data is available for teams, such as children served in programs other than NC pre-K through private providers or Part Day preschool programs that are not licensed but serving children? I will start this and then ask Karen and Carla certainly to weigh in. But certainly having your Smart Start partnership and Head Start director engaged, they have a lot of data at the community level, and that's part of what we'll be talking about at regional meetings, is what is the right kind of data and where can you find it. In addition, the CCR&R, so the Child Care Resource and Referral agencies in your community, also have substantial amount of data. Do you, Karen and Carla, want to add some points to that?
Sure. Head Starts do collect a lot of data they do outcomes reporting. There's also a program information report that they submit every year that has a lot of education, family engagement, staffing, anything you can imagine available. I do have a lot of that, but also we may be asking you to bring some of that data and working with your team to collect that data and bring that to the regional meeting.
From a Title I perspective, we do collect number of children served, amount of funding that's spent, whether you're dually enrolling or blending, and then we in turn share that with the North Carolina partnership, and they combine that with some other numbers that they have available as well.
Okay, we have a question about how to register for the regional meetings. The simplest way, if you go to buildthefoundation.org/ESSA, ESSA, you'll find a link to the registration there. Have Head Start, I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, you'll need to work with your team to determine who's going to register the whole team, because you'll do one registration for the entire team.
Thank you, Karen, that's correct. Have Head Start agencies and LEAs been notified of regional meetings and webinar opportunities? I'm going to say yes, but I'll let you elaborate, Karen, if you would like to.
Yes, I have sent this information to each of the Head Start directors. It may not have made it to the local center director specifically, but the Head Start director of the agency, and there are 55 grantees in the state. Each of those have received this information.
Great. Someone asked if they'll receive confirmation of regional meeting registration. You should receive an email. The person who inputted the information should have received an email after. We are going through teams to make sure that the right folks have been entered and included. We'll be following up with some to talk about ensuring that you have the Head Start person engaged and what that might look like, or Smart Start, or what have you. So you will receive confirmation of that. How can we share this webinar? Is there a link? So yes, this webinar is recorded. You will receive a link to it after the webinar ends either later today or on Monday, along with a link to the PowerPoint presentation. How do we find out about the regional meetings? So I can go back for a moment to the slide here that tells you where they are and when they are. There's a direct link to the registration form at the bottom. The short version to access it would just be buildthefoundation.org/ESSA. Let's see, I think we have time for one more question. Hold on, and I'll see. Is this the CCIP plan, or is there other paperwork for the LEA district plan?
So this is the information for the ESSA plan that goes into CCIP. So it's the same plan, that's been completed in the past and submitted electronically. And so we're just asking you to really think about early learning in an intentional way and include that in the plans that are submitted. So it's the plan that the district would submit to federal program monitoring as they usually would.
Thank you. I know we did not get to everyone's questions. Here is the contact information for Carla, Karen, and me. And so feel free to reach out to any of us with your questions. We're really excited that you spent your hour with us this morning, and hope that everyone has a fantastic weekend. Thank you.